All right, so I watched this debate at the Capturing Christianity conference, Trent versus Ben Watkins. And I guess because I watched the debate, I started getting all these, you know how YouTube is, they have a way of popping up in your notifications. I now started getting all these notifications for all things Trent for the past 4 or 5 days a week, which is actually sometimes a good thing. YouTube suggestions have actually led me to stuff that I've proved useful to me. I'm pretty sure the entire reason why I discovered Bernardo Kastrup was I watch a lot of T-Jump's. T-Jump has a lot of discussions on his channel, and I usually watch about a third of them or so, or I usually check them out for a bit. And one of them popped up in my notifications. I'm pretty sure that's how I discovered Bernardo Kastrup. So I'm a fan of YouTube notifications in general. And actually, them sending me all things Trent for the last week turned out to be really interesting, because they sent me a Dan Barker, an old debate with him and Dan Barker. So I got to compare his debate with Ben Watkins to an old debate with Dan Barker. And the comparison was really, really illuminating, really interesting. Matter of fact, it was night and day. And it underscores one of the things I've been talking about a lot on my channel of late. If you've been listening to some of my past videos, the difference between the philosophical atheists and what I've been calling the debate me bro clowns. Now, Dan Barker is not quite a debate me bro clown. I mean, obviously he's more standing, more credibility than that. But his style of atheism is heavily influenced by that Four Horsemen, new atheists, and they go, don't call us new atheists. They get upset if you call them new atheists. That's exactly what they are, exactly what they've been influenced by. Four Horsemen influenced. He's basically very similar to Aaron Ra. It's like Aaron Ra minus all the foaming at the mouth. He's a way more civilized version of Aaron Ra. I'm not saying he goes on tirades and goes, I want evidence! Evidence! He doesn't do stuff like that. So he's not quite like Aaron Ra. He doesn't just foam at the mouth and explode in debates. But it's the same brand of atheism. It's the exact same thing as the Debate Me Bros. I think he even calls himself a lactheist. I'm pretty sure he even called himself that in the debate. And so by way of comparison, I was able to compare him to Ben Watkins, who, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the leading examples of the philosophical atheist. He's pretty much studied in philosophy, and the different watching these two different approaches was night and day. Honestly, it was night and day. So it's you should check it out. You should at least watch the opening statements and compare the two, because it really underscores the difference. And what I've been saying the whole time is, at the end of the day, the philosophical atheists, a la Ben Watkins, are going to be the only ones left standing. And part of the reason why I say that is obvious from Dan Barker's opening statement. First of all, in his opening statement, it was hilarious, because Trent's opening was very similar in the two debates. He did the argument for motion. I'm pretty sure he used both arguments in both debates. And then in the Dan Barker debate, he went a little bit into an argument for morality, a moral argument for God, and he went into it a little bit more in the Ben Watkins. But they were very similar. I watched an interview with him where he said there was a big difference in the Ben Watkins one, but I couldn't quite perceive what that difference was. But the interesting thing was the difference between Dan Barker and Ben Watkins. I mean, honestly, it was astonishing, the difference. So Dan Barker, first of all, his entire counter argument to the philosophical argument, I swear to God this is true too. I'm not making this up. Word for word, his entire counter argument to the argument for motion is, oh, that's just words. I swear to God that's true. I swear to God that's exactly what he said. Well, we can talk about the philosophical argument he laid for God, but what is that anyways? That's just words. Okay. I'm not sure exactly what he thought he was using in his arguments that were different than words, but that was his counter argument. I promise that's the truth. That shows you where we're at with that certain style of atheists. Now, what I'm going to start pointing out in videos to come, and I really think this is true, is that style of atheism is on the way out. Why? Is because I think it was heavily contingent on atheist hegemon. Going back about 4 or 5 years when I first entered the space, atheists outnumbered Christians in the space, Twitter and YouTube, by something like 7-1. That has been cut down a lot. They still outnumber the Christians, and they still have a hegemon here, but it's a lot different. It's something like 7-3 or 7-4. Pretty soon, the numbers are going to be equally matched. And then once the numbers are equally matched, the Christians are going to start outnumbering the atheists, and then they're going to outnumber the atheists by a lot. This is a trend that I foresee coming. Now, I'm going to talk about this in detail in videos to come. Why? Because I think it's going to dramatically affect this space. It's not going to affect the philosophical atheists at all. So if you're one of the philosophical atheists who listen to me, Answers from Reason and that crew, relax. You guys are fine no matter what. Why? Because your brand of atheism isn't contingent on anything happening in, the Christian community, or anything happening, any trends out there in the world at large. What I said, the philosophical atheists are basically just people who are interested in philosophy of religion, really interested in philosophy of religion, and they don't happen to believe in God. There will always be a niche market for that. From now until the end of time, I don't see them having any problem, no matter what the trends are in the public at large. But the style of atheism that came about by the Four Horsemen, which Dan Barker is representational of, it's mostly the new atheists. They don't like that label. For some reason, they'll go, well, it's not new, it's been around forever. It's just a term. It's just like you call a Christian a progressive Christian or a conservative Christian. It does mean something in context. Okay, it's just a way of classifying a certain type of atheist, and it generally holds true. And it certainly held true of Dan Barker. Their whole style and approach is contingent on atheist hegemon. Why? Because Dan Barker's arguments in this debate were so bad. Honestly, just terrible. It was really terrible. And the counter-argument, that's what he offered as a counter-argument for the philosophical argument. That's just words. Okay, that would not work if atheists were outnumbered by Christians. That would not work at all. Nobody would tolerate that. And for example, in one of my last videos, I talked about Pine Creek's style of engagement. Pine Creek's style of engagement is basically, if he's streaming on a stream when there's Christians, it's basically grab a Christian, browbeat him for 2 hours, and make him answer all these questions. He had poor Rebecca on Nathan's channel the other day. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm sure it's more of the same. Here, let me ask you all these. I reserve the right to hold your feet to the fire for the next hour and a half and do nothing but ask you, you got to answer everything that you can answer about Christianity, and meanwhile, nothing happens to me. That is contingent on atheist hegemon as well, that style of interaction. If you don't believe me, go watch him on the Thought Adventure podcast, where he was outnumbered by the Muslims. Now, he held his own, he did fine. I'm not saying that they embarrassed him or anything, but he wasn't deconverting anybody anytime soon. You see the difference when he's outnumbered. Well, that day is coming in this space. Why? Because in the real world, Christians outnumber atheists out there on planet Earth, in the United States of America, by a lot, by something like 10-1. And faster than Christians are deconstructing and deconverting from their said religions, they're going to be migrating online. So sometime in the next 5 years, there's going to be parity between Christians and atheists online. Atheists got here first. And for a while, they outnumbered Christians by a lot. That's how they developed this really terrible style of interaction. They got away with it. Why? Because they were outnumbering Christians. Dan Barker's a perfect case in point. The arguments he used in his opening statement were absolutely abysmal. 60% of his argument, literally 60%, was the Old Testament is such an awful book, the God of the Old Testament, yeah, exactly, yada, yada, yada. The Old Testament endorses slavery, and that God is such a bigoted thug, he's such a terrible God. He all but quoted Richard Dawkins word for word, he's the most unpleasant character in all of literature. That was the 60% of his opening statement, was God does not exist because the Old Testament has so many terrible scriptures. That's the argument. And it's a terrible argument. The only reason why it lasted is because atheists outnumbered Christians by so much. Why? Because at its core, it's a really bad argument. Remember, they're supposed to be arguing that God does not exist, or, giving you some sort of idea as to why you would hold to the position that God does not exist. Okay, you got Old Testament scriptures. Yeah, there are challenging scriptures in the Old Testament. Everybody understands that. But God can exist, and there can be challenging there can be challenging scriptures at the Old Testament at the exact same time. Those two are not contradictory. They're not, they have nothing to do with each other necessarily. The only thing that makes people think it has something to do with each other is if you came from fundamentalist land. And I get it. If you were raised fundamentalist, that is a shock to the system once you get out of your little fundamentalist, whatever, your fundamentalist Bible, little Bible camp or whatever, and you start reading the Bible on your own, the first time you come across some of the challenging scriptures, they might throw you. Well, wait a minute, they didn't tell me about the scripture that says stone a witch on Sunday. They didn't tell me about the Old Testament, Exodus 23. But if they actually, that might rock you if you were taught that the Bible was inerrant. But if you're not a biblical literalist, and reality check, Dan Barker is not a biblical literalist, they shouldn't challenge you at all. The idea that there's some sort of big, huge, overwhelming burden for Christianity is ludicrous. It's propaganda. It's propaganda disguised as an argument. It's literally anti-Christian propaganda disguised as an argument. Even if you just take the Old Testament, and just as a normal human being, if you came in with no dog in the fight, no agenda, let's say you weren't an atheist and you weren't a Christian, and you were just reading the Old Testament, the idea that the God of the Old Testament is this angry, terrible, capricious, and that's all the only thing to the character is really over-exaggerated. There's plenty of scriptures in even the Old Testament about the love and mercy and compassion and kindness of God. Plenty. So there are a couple of go-to ones that atheists like to cite. Even just take the book of Exodus. Okay, that's one of the ones that atheists go to time and time again, where the dreaded Exodus 21 and 22 come from. Even the book of Exodus. The whole book is not a manual on owning slaves. There's 2 sentences about slavery in the book of Exodus. The rest of it is this long, involved story. About Moses. Ironically, the story is about deliverance from slavery. So the idea, first of all, it's logically meaningless. Okay, if you're a rational human being and you don't believe in God, you might have halfway decent arguments for why you don't believe in God, which is what Ben Watkins presented, which I'm going to get to in a minute. But the fact that there are challenging scriptures in the Old Testament should not be on your list of this is actually a real challenge for Christians. It's not. There's nothing about the Old Testament that Christians need to even address or answer in today's world. If you're not a Bible literalist, it's a halfway decent argument against the inerrancy of the Old Testament, sure. Then it's a pretty good argument. Has a lot to do with why I'm not a biblical literalist. Why? Because there's a handful of scriptures that are really hard to defend in terms of inerrancy. Okay, that's obvious. But if you are not a literalist, and reality check, Ted Barker's not a literalist. No, he's not. He doesn't believe it's inerrant. It's not. There are some things in here that are morally iffy and morally questionable. Therefore, the whole thing is garbage. Is a ludicrous point of view. And they over-exaggerate, first of all, how many there are. He said there's something like 1,500. There aren't. Even if you go into like the Skeptic's annotated book of the Bible, they'll come up with like 700 really legitimately questionable ones. And then some of the other ones that he's saying in his list of 1,500, he's probably going on like, there's some they cite in the New Testament too, but those are usually kind of fake. I come not to bring peace on earth but the sword. Yeah, okay. Nobody thinks that he meant that literally. I think you should hate your parents. Okay, nobody thinks that that's supposed to be taken literally. Not even like, Kent Oven. It's like, we literally have to hate our parents, guys. So those aren't legitimate. There's a bunch in there that aren't legitimate. There are legitimately challenged, morally iffy, morally questionable parts of the Old Testament. I'll give that. I will see that right away. What I'm telling you is that that's a terrible argument against the existence of God. It's irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant to the existence of God. Why? Because God can exist, and there can be morally questionable parts of the Old Testament. Case closed. End of discussion. And it was literally the centerpiece of his entire argument. Literally. It was almost 60% of everything he talked about. The only thing he does is amp up the emotions, which is propaganda. And again, this goes back to the core paradox. If propaganda, anti-Christian propaganda is amplifying the emotional content, he practically all but said, they're drowning babies. Jesus is drowning babies. He practically went there. And all that's doing is amplifying the emotional intensity, right? It's the essence of propaganda. The problem is propaganda is the enemy of critical thinking. If you were a detached observer, a morally neutral observer that had no dog in the fight, you weren't an atheist, you weren't a Christian, you never heard of the Old Testament, you wouldn't find it all that really trippy and violent and awful. There are a couple of parts of it that you trip out about, and that's it. And if you do not follow the faith, there's no excuse for you reading it like a literalist. I'm going to hammer this point home, because these arguments got to go away. Why? Because they're awful and ridiculous. There's supposed to be an argument against the existence of God, and it isn't. When I went looking in other texts, if you are not a practitioner of my particular religious tradition, if you are not a Christian and you are a non-believer, it is contingent upon you in the name of integrity, okay? Integrity itself demands that you read, even if you were a former fundamentalist. I give you 5 years to read it like a literalist. And then integrity demands that you read the entire thing as allegory. The entire thing. You don't have to worry about which ones are true and which ones are not. Why? Because you are not a practitioner of the faith. So you only read it as allegory and see, are these morals good? Is there valuable moral information in here? Is the thing that Jesus is preaching actually valuable and worth following? And Dan Barker would be the first person to tell you yes. He'd be the first person to tell you yes, that there are some things that Jesus teaches that he thinks would be better to adopt. But that's the centerpiece of Christianity. Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And every single solitary person listening to me, including Aaron Ron, every atheist, understands roughly what that translates to. It means be a more compassionate, sensitive, be very sensitive. No, it means be a more compassionate, I don't know why I do that. It's be sensitive to other people. It means be a more compassionate, merciful, caring human being. Adopt Christ-likeness. That's what Christianity teaches, or at least that's what Christianity is supposed to teach. If there were Christians today who practiced slavery and were using the Old Testament as a justification, then it'd be a halfway decent argument about something wrong with Christianity, a halfway decent argument. That hasn't happened for 200 years. 200 years, hence it's a lousy argument. Honest to God, it's a lousy argument. And his counter-argument against philosophy was like, that's just words. I swear to God, that's exactly what his counter-argument was. I promise. Literally, word for word, his counter-argument. Let me see if I'm running out of time. So, let's compare it to Ben Watkins before, almost 20 minutes. Okay. Let me compare it to Ben Watkins before I just keep ranting about Dan Barker. Dan Barker's a halfway decent guy, but his arguments, his counter-apologetics are absolutely terrible. And those are the ones that been circulating around the atheist community for about 10 years. Those are only going to work so far as atheists outnumber Christians. Once there's equality, those aren't going to work. Why? Because they're lousy arguments. And anybody can point them out. They say nothing about the ontology. Like I said, 50 times a day, I can say this 50 times a day if you want. God can exist and there can be challenging scriptures in the Old Testament at the exact same time. It is not contingent upon me or any Christian to justify weird scriptures in the Old Testament. Why? We didn't write the Bible. It would be contingent on us if there were, slave-holding Christians in today's world saying, look, it's written in the Bible. Then you'd have a case. Since there aren't, and that hasn't happened for 200 years, you don't. It's a terrible argument. It's a literally terrible argument. It's only contingent. It's a great argument. It's a decent argument against inerrancy. But I expect if you deconvert from fundamentalist Christianity, you get over the fundamentalist part pretty quickly. Give you 5 years. Then you start reading the Bible as allegory. And if you start going, well, wait, it's either all true or all false, that's fundamentalism. That's black-white thinking. That's black-white thinking. Nobody takes any other book on the face of this earth, even holy books, that way. When I was reading the Tao Te Ching, I didn't go, if I find errors in this, I'm going to throw out everything. When I was reading the Bhagavad Gita, I read it as allegory, which means I didn't wait until a part tripped me out and then go, see? See, Hindus, this whole thing is terrible. Look at this. Justify this. That's the entire argument. Dan Barker just goes back to the questionable parts, amplifies their emotional intensity, which is called propaganda, and then tells you that you gotta solve this, or God doesn't exist. It's ludicrous. Absolutely abysmal argument. Absolutely abysmal. The only reason it has survived as long as it has is because it's emotionally effective, but the emotional effect of it is contingent on atheists outnumbering Christians by a lot. Once the parity is there in numbers, that argument won't work at all anymore. Won't work at all anymore. Because honestly, it's a dishonest argument. Totally is. If you don't believe in God, that's your prerogative. Your perfectly legitimate point of view. Okay? But at some point, I expect you to have an honest read on the Bible. Since there are hundreds of us out here who are not literalists, taking it literally so you can score fake points is not an honest take on the Bible. It's not even close. And somewhere in the next 5 years, someone's going to start telling you that. And they're going to start repeating that. And you're going to be done with those type of arguments. Why? Because they got to go. They're irrelevant. God can exist, and there can be challenging scriptures in the Old Testament at the exact same time. And no, it's not contingent on any Christian that we answer the Old Testament. Why? We didn't write the book. Didn't write the book. Perfectly obvious why there's morally questionable stuff in there. Why? A tribe of barbarians wrote the darn book. That's why. A tribe of slave-holding barbarians wrote the darn book. The better, more intelligent question is, why is there good values in there at all? And you only got two options. Either they're God-inspired, or they're inspired by the best case scenario, the best thing that human beings have ever found in their heart prior to its inception. And both of those two options look good for Christianity. You can decide on either one, I don't care. But what you can't do is keep pretending because there's 500 or so questionable things, the whole thing is terrible. Why? It's a dishonest argument. Period. It's dishonest and awful, and it needs to stop. And Christians shouldn't even play along. Even if you're an inerrantist, stop picking up that sword. Why? You're dying on a hill. You dying on that hill is not helping. That's why. It's not helping. It's not. It's really not. Every single solitary atheist listening to me, I don't care if you don't believe in God. But if you don't believe in God, even if you are a former Christian, this is going to weird you out because nobody told you, but you should be reading the entire book as allegory. Every minute of it. Why? You don't believe it's true. So you're just reading it as literature. Or as Ben Watkins, no, Richard Dawkins would say, as literature. As literature. You'll find that Yahweh is not the most unpleasant character in all of literature. He has his moments, for sure. He has his moments where he destroys, everything that you worked hard for. Every once in a while he can seem pretty capricious and ill-tempered. I'll give you that. The best way to understand that is as, consider ye therefore the kindness and severity of God. Yeah, Yahweh is badass sometimes. Watch your back. Watch your back even when you're putting him down. Why? Because one day he might just roll up on you and destroy everything you hold near and dear. Just for no reason. I just like doing things like just because he wants to watch you suffer. Now, all right, so getting on to Ben Watkins. Yes, I'm running out of time. I understand that, but I'm starting to have fun. Okay, so Ben Watkins. Now, night and day. There are only two arguments that I'll focus on. The second one I'll focus on. Why? Because it's possibly the strongest case that atheists can make around the boards. The first one he starts off with is that naturalism is simpler than Christianity. It's more parsimonious. Now, this is decent, but there's a problem with this. And the problem with this is that just in terms of everything else, it's night and day. Ben Watkins 100 times better equipped to be having these conversations than Dan Barker, and it's just he's polished, he's smart. It's it's just night and day. And every other thing I score him A as opposed to C's. But the two centerpiece arguments that I'll just deal with in the interest of time. Naturalism is more parsimonious than Christianity. Okay, this is true. This is one of the things I've been trying to say. The idea that Christianity is the more parsimonious alternative never really going to work. Why? Because Christianity is an extra thing. You are postulating something that nobody can see, taste, touch, or smell. Yes, we the Christians can see, taste, touch, and smell him, but they don't smell him. What's he smell like, Greg? I don't know. It smells like incense and peppermints. Incense and peppermints, pieces of time. Dead kings of many things I can't define. Yeah, I didn't think I was going there, did you? No, why did you go there? Not sure. All right, so move right along. Incense and peppermints, pieces of time. Dead kings of many things I can't define. Who cares? The games reach. It's actually a great song. It's a classic from the 60s. Incense and Peppermints. Strawberry Alarm Clock? I'm thinking the name of the band. Could that be right? Strawberry Fever? I'm thinking Strawberry Shortcake. Pretty sure Strawberry Alarm Clock. Sounds vaguely right. That sounds right. It's actually a great tune. Check it out when this is over. I think it's brilliant. It's classic. The problem, okay, if you are offering atheism as the more parsimonious alternative, this is true up to a point. But the problem with this argument, okay, is that it is presupposing, baked into the argument, it's presupposing, this is why the Christian version of it doesn't work. Because, God is an extra thing. The reason why naturalism can be described as parsimonious is because the world functions according to natural laws, and we all see that and understand that. It's the same argument I make with my conscious realism as idealism argument. Okay? Naturalism exists, we all understand that. The natural world exists, and it functions according to natural laws. The problem with saying it's more parsimonious than Christianity, so it starts out ahead, is that you are presupposing, and I understand that Ben Watkins believes this, but it's presupposing that every miracle claim you have ever heard is false. That ain't going to work. Now, it's one thing to say, I don't believe in any of those miracle claims. And this is where the Christian will usually ruin the debate for himself. Why? Because he'll go to this hardest possible, he'll go to a resurrection or immaculate conception. He'll go to the centerpiece miraculous claims of Christianity and try to prove those. Okay, that's not what saying naturalism is more parsimonious where you run into trouble. I don't have to prove to you the hardest possible miracles of Christianity, the centerpiece miracles of Christianity, to say that naturalism is false. It's contingent upon you. If you say naturalism is what is the way the world operates, there are millions upon millions upon millions of miraculous claims and supernatural claims. They aren't unique to Christianity. You are presupposing that not a single one of them is true? Anywhere ever? Can't really say that. You can't. I can find some. Now, with miracles, keep in mind, a miracle is by definition impossible, not by definition, as some have said, implausible. There are miracles that are implausible, wildly implausible, and then there are miracles that are eminently reasonable and plausible. And if you want to see the difference for yourself, and if you're an atheist or an agnostic, I suggest you do this. Go click on the link of basically any old church in town, but any sort of spirit-filled or charismatic type church will do the trick. Go to any church in your neighborhood. Do not limit yourself to the least plausible miraculous accounts. Go to the ones that are eminently plausible and eminently reasonable. You're going to find some that you actually believe. Now, some of those ones that you actually believe could be accounted for easily within the context of naturalism. I prayed to God and He laid hands on me and I felt emotional peace, and because of that emotional resilience that I felt strong, I was able to put down drinking and alcohol. That's a literal miracle from my own life. That's eminently plausible, and that can be completely explained with natural processes. But that's not every miracle that you're ever going to find. There are miracles that are eminently reasonable and eminently plausible, and they aren't contingent on, wildly outlandish supernatural claims. Remember what's the tagline? Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Okay, we don't have to go to extraordinary claims. That's why I said go to church right nearby. Go to church online that has some miracle testimonies and go through the most convincing of them. 3 or 4 of those most convincing ones are going to be hard to write off. They're going to be hard to account for given naturalism. Literally almost impossible. That's why we call them miracles. Maybe there's some form of natural explanation, and if you search far and wide, you can really if you had time to investigate, you could maybe dig out a natural explanation. But you can't presuppose that and then say, therefore naturalism starts out ahead. You can't. Why? Because there's a lot. And not every miracle is wildly outlandish. They're not all Jesus appeared in a burrito somewhere in Mexico. They're not all of that quality. They're really not. That's what atheists love to do. They take the dumbest, least plausible ones. What do you think about the Eye of Fatima? Guy was browbeating me with that for like 5 straight days on Twitter. Eye of Fatima. I don't care. Don't even know what you're talking about. I'm not even sure. But you could go to your local church today, tomorrow, the next day, and research the miracle claims right under your own nose. You're going to find at least 5 that are hard to shake off. In days to come, a year from now, when I think people are ready to hear it, I'll tell you some from my own life. I will tell you some from my own life. And pretty much everybody listening to me is going to believe me. Does that prove God? No. But it certainly challenges naturalism. Certainly does. To say that naturalism starts out ahead is to presuppose that every single miracle claim you have ever heard is false, or can be explained through the natural processes. Some of them are going to give you pause. Let's just put it like that. And if you want, you could go digging up tonight and find some that give you pause today. I'm not even talking about Greg Kinnear's book. I've never even bothered to read it. Is it good? I have no idea. I don't know. I'm talking right here under your doorstep, the closest church in town near you where they have miracle claims. Bet you $1,000 you could find 3 miracle claims in the closest church, the church that's right down the street, that are really hard to shake off. Why do I bet you $1,000? Because that's exactly what happened to me. I went to the closest church right down the road. Now that's not an extraordinary claim requiring extraordinary evidence. A mundane claim right down the street. But it was a big challenge to naturalism, a big challenge to the naturalist way, interpretive framework, for sure. So that's the problem with that particular argument. Let me see if I'm running out of time. Now, the other one I wanted to focus on is possibly the strongest. Oh, I'm really running out of time. I gotta make these videos more crisp. The strongest possible argument for atheism out there, or at least it's the strongest case. I think it's the strongest intuition that atheists have. It's called the argument from Theological Evil. That's how I've heard it referenced sometime. Ben Watkins' version of it was particularly strong. Now, if you are an atheist and you ever feel like one day you're a little trembly and weak in your atheism, and you're like, oof, I don't know, just the things Craig said yesterday really shaking me. I'm starting to believe in God again. And you want to break, and you're going to break out in cold sweats. Go to the Theological Argument for Evils, particularly the one presented by Ben Watkins. Why? Because it's the strongest possible case for atheism that can be made, or at least one of them. That's why I said night and day compared to Dan Barker. And go back to Dan Barker, but you're deceiving yourself if you think those are strong arguments against God, because they're not. But the one that he laid down, is possibly the strongest case that can be made. The problem is, it is not necessarily an argument, it's an intuition. It's an intuition, but it's a really compelling intuition for most people who do not believe in God. And if you're ever in a case, deconverted man, if you ever get a little nervous because you're starting to think, well, maybe that was God who talked to me yesterday, you're breaking out into cold sweats. Can't be. You freak out. Pine Creek Doug, same thing. You start to get really nervous. Just focus. Grab your thoughts and focus in on Ben Watkins' Theological Evil argument. Basically what it's saying is, it doesn't make any sense to him, and that, a God, an omnipotent, omnibenevolent God, would have this whole process of, evolution. It's not saying that evolution disproves God. It's more complicated and nuanced than that. It's that, 1,000,000 years ago, before a human being ever walked the face on the earth, there was an animal, getting eaten by something. It's this whole process of theological evil baked into the cake of life itself. Seems to be an intrinsic enormity of suffering involved for animals to evolve into their present state. And even in their present state, you could click on a link tomorrow and see a zebra. Honestly, you could see a zebra getting his face eaten by a crocodile. I swear to God, I've seen it on YouTube. You could. And it seems to him, really, really wildly implausible that there's some omnibenevolent, omniscient, creator of all of this, given that those are the facts of life on the ground. I'm not sure if I expressed it, if that would express it to his satisfaction, but that's the best that I can do with it. That's the best case that I can think of to explain it. It's strong. The problem is, it's not really an argument, it's an intuition. It's not an argument. It's an intuition. Now, why I think it's the strongest possible one, and this is what you should be doing if you're an atheist. Take your intuitions, your strongest possible intuitions, as to why there isn't a God, and if the Old Testament has terrible scriptures in it, that's on you. Why? Because that ain't relevant. That ain't relevant. That's not on us. That's on you. Why? Because that is not a relevant intuition. Yeah, there are challenging scriptures in the Old Testament. That's why I was, the Dan Barker thing is ridiculous. Yes, challenging scriptures in the Old Testament. No, God can exist and there can be those at the exact same time. It's not relevant to the ontology at all. But this, by Ben Watkins, it isn't necessarily relevant to the ontology either. That's why it's not necessarily an argument. But it's where most atheists will get tripped up. Well, most atheists I've talked to who call themselves non-resistant non-belief, and yes, I've heard that from Schellenberg. There are atheists out there who are pretty close to that. One of the guys, Pleasure of Doubt, who I used to stream with a lot, wasn't evangelical about being an atheist at all. When he would start thinking maybe there is a God, that's the one that would always sideline him. That's the one that would always bring him back to, no, I'm going to watch Pine Creek videos. I'm not going to church tomorrow. Why? Because there couldn't possibly be a God. It's an intuition, though. It's not an argument. It could possibly be chiseled out into a presentation that would be really convincing to a lot of people, but it is not an argument. I mean, I'm not closing it up with God in the gaps or solving it with God in the gaps, but, that's the point. It seems to me that you could just easily, that's how God ordained things to so be. Yeah, it seems mysterious and it trips you out. That's why I'm saying it's an intuition, not an argument. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to atheists how there couldn't be a God. Why? Because God would never choose to do things that way. That's the core of it, as an argument. But that's assuming assuming you're in the mind of God. Now, what seems to be the core fundamental difference between Christians and atheists, or religious people in general and atheists, is that our intuitions, the intuitions that are our go-to intuitions that motivate our behavior at a really, really deep level, seem to be decidedly different. I get why that intuition makes a lot of sense to him. I don't think it actually is an argument. I think it's a compelling intuition that makes it hard for him to think there could possibly be a God. That makes complete sense to me. I think it's the strongest thing in the atheist wheelhouse. It doesn't necessarily demand an explanation. I don't think, maybe atheists disagree with you. Okay, fine. But it seems to me at the core that there are different motivating intuitions at the fundamentals of our beings. Like atheists and people like myself seem to be wired differently. I've noticed this before. I would say atheists are more analytical in a lot of ways. They're more, they appeal to things that are less intuitive and less emotional and less, and they'll tell you that that's the right way to be, but it's the right way to be within reason. I understand that you should proportion your belief to the evidence, and I agree with that up to a certain point. But this doesn't necessarily count as evidence against the existence of God. What it counts as is a powerful, mystery about if there is a God. Wow, that seems really weird that God would ordain things to be like that. I get why it's compelling. Now, I get why that speaks to atheists. I get why that makes sense to them. It just doesn't seem, intuitively correct to somebody. Like, if there's a God, why on earth would the world be like that? It's deeper than the problem of evil in some sense, because it's more complicated and more nuanced. And, there are millions of years prior to our existence where there would be things going on that no one was bearing witness to at all. And yet here an animal was tearing apart another animal. It seems to somebody almost perfectly reasonable that there is no God involved. That's why I think it's strong, because it makes sense to me why that would be convincing or compelling to an atheist. So it's one of the strongest possible arguments for the non-existence of God that you could possibly make. Again, the problem with it is not an argument, it's an intuition. It's something that gnaws at you if you're a Christian. And if you're a Christian and that gnaws at you, I told you some of my remedies. Pray without ceasing, pray without ceasing, pray without ceasing. That's the major one. There's a difference in the approach. Deep down at the fundamental level, there is a real difference between, the type of people we are versus the type of people the atheists are. That seems to be like a real chasm. Because there are intuitions that make automatic sense to Christians that they don't share. For example, there's the argument from design. The reason why I never argue the argument from design is the same reason why is the same problem with the Ben Watkins counter apologetic. It's a really strong intuition to a lot of Christians. And you can make a compelling emotional case for it. You see something like the majesty of a lion, and a lion, there's no reason on earth why a lion would have this gorgeous mane and be this really intense, awesome to look at creature, except that it seems intuitive to you that somebody knew that it was going to be looked at, or beauty was part of it. Now that's a little different than just look at the trees. And I'm not offering it as an argument for God. I'm just saying it's an intuition that makes a lot of automatic emotional sense to most theists and most religious people. And quite honestly, most people. Quite honestly, a lot of people. It makes a lot of sense to a lot of people. The overwhelming majesty of it all. The overwhelming, those times where you feel like life just makes sense and it's so profound and mysterious. That's an intuition that all religious people at some sense share. It's not necessarily an argument. It's basically the design argument, but it's the counter argument to the argument for design makes sense. Yeah, the chances of life being created on this planet are so infinitesimally small, but then we're talking about the infinity of space, so in the infinity of space, the small little, we're talking about the small chance. Anyways, I'm rambling a little, running out of time. The main thing I wanted to focus on is the difference between Ben Watkins and Dan Barker. That's the most instructive and illuminating part between these two, because it's night and day. As I said, Ben Watkins is about as strong as you can get in the atheist column. That's about as good as an argumentation as you are likely to find. And Dan Barker, that style of atheism, I got to wrap it up because the video is going to, I got to wrap it up. But I might do a part 2 to this, depends on the response. Dan Barker's style of atheism, I honestly am not sure that that's going to survive in the years to come. I really don't think it will. When the space starts to be dominated by by sheer numbers of Christians, I don't see how that type of argumentation stands. I really don't. The Ben Watkins argumentation, that's going to make sense to people from now until the end of time. It's the core of the mystery. Let's just put it that way. It's the core of the mystery of life. If there isn't a God, that's the most compelling question you could ask. If there is a God, that's really trippy. That's really a weird way of God, conducting the world itself. The reason why most religious people don't think that way is that's not how we think. We don't look at the thing that doesn't make sense. We're more in tune with the parts that make sense, that speak to us. So we're just wired differently. But you could probably deconvert yourself if you would think about that long and hard enough. You could probably spend a lot of agonizing 3 a.m. nights going, there can't be a God because That's why I said it's strong. Strong. It's worth considering, worth thinking about, and ultimately worth, engaging with. So with that, I will wrap it up. That is all for now, kids. The Mass is ended. Go in peace. Amen.